Hello and welcome to another video. So I've recently come across these web apps where the idea is that you can upload a PDF document or Word document, and then you're able to ask an AI some very specific questions regarding that document. So what happens is that these AI bots actually use the content of these documents as context to be able to answer your question. And so for this video, I thought it would be super cool to create a project where you could upload a CV or some resumes as well as job description, and then a chatbot will help you make a hiring decision. So I'm thinking for this video, we'll first look at how this works under the hood, and after that I'll do an implementation. So we'll be using something called Langchain for this video, and this is the idea, right? You have some data sources, some structured data, maybe some unstructured data, and then you're able to feed that into an LLM app, and then you're able to ask some questions regarding that data. The way this works is that you load these documents and then you split them up into chunks. And then you compute something called embeddings, which are just numerical representations of the data. And after that, you ask your question, your query, to the chatbot. Since you also have the embeddings of the documents, of the splits, as well as your query, you basically figure out, okay, which chunk is most relevant to the question that I'm asking, and then that specific part of that specific document is then retrieved and sent along with the query to the chatbot, and the chatbot then is able to answer your query. The reason this is done is because you don't want to send the entire document or multiple documents, because there's something called this context window in LLMs, which is basically a limit on how much data it can process. So ideally we would use the OpenAI API to do this, but it's not, even though it's not crazy expensive, it's not free either. So I went looking for an alternative and found this product called GPT for All, which is an open source, locally running GPT. And although it requires a very beefy computer if you want to run the model itself locally, what we can use it for is to actually generate the embeddings for the query as well as for the documents. There's this GPT for All Python library that can be installed, and that can be used to generate embeddings completely free of cost. So I wanted to do a quick look at embeddings and cosine similarities. So I have three sentences here. The first one is about dogs. Dogs are animals with 4 legs. They're very cute and fluffy. The second one is similar, except that it's about cats. The rest of the sentence is exactly the same. The last one is completely different. And so I'm using GPT for All to actually compute the embeddings here. And then I'm doing some reshaping. That's not important. And then you'll notice here that the shape of the embeddings is 384, which is actually the number of features of that content. And this would actually be much more if we were to use OpenAI's embedding API. Now the embeddings themselves are actually just numbers, as in everything computer science, right? It's just numbers because it is a numerical representation. So we can't really do much with this or make sense of it in that sense. But what we can do is actually compute the cosine similarities. So the first two sentences were quite similar, as you recall. So if we compute the cosine similarity between the first two sentences, it's going to be very close to 1. It's going to be very high. If we do the same with the first and the last, it's going to be very low, as is seen here. It's close to 0. So the problem here is that because there are so many dimensions, we can't really visualize this, and I sort of wanted to give you guys sort of a visual aspect to it as well. So for that I use PCA to do some dimensionality reduction, where we're just taking the huge number of dimensions and just sort of compressing them into 3 dimensions, which sort of explain the features the most. And so I did this. Now I wanted to also do a plot, and the 2D plot didn't actually work that well. So I started to do a 3D plot, which actually is actually pretty cool. I didn't know you could do this in Python, but apparently you can. So I also found this Medium article that talks a little bit about word embeddings. And you'll notice here that cat and dog sort of lie in the same sort of plane in the vector space, whereas human goes completely in the other direction. So this sort of gives an indication of cat and dog, being similar in meaning. And so the same thing here, right? So you can imagine one of these being cat, other being dog. I haven't really labeled them. It's super bad, I know. But you can imagine one being cat, other being dog, and so you can see that they lie in sort of the same space, in the same plane, whereas the third dot, the green dot, is completely in the other direction. And if we were to compute some vectors, you also notice the angle between these two would be smaller. It's going to be this angle, whereas the angle between the red and the green dot, this angle, or the blue and the green dot, which is this angle, would be much larger, which would mean more dissimilarity or less similarity. Okay, so I found 2 resumes. The first one is this noob developer that I found from a Reddit post. Somebody wants other people to basically roast his resume. And it seems like a pretty good resume, to be honest. And then I also found a second one, which is just, I think it's just a random, it's basically just a resume template. It was actually a bit hard to find resumes, like real resumes. So I had to make do with this one, but it seems like it also has a bunch of information that can be parsed by our chatbot. So 2 resumes and then also a job description. This is something that I found from LinkedIn, that I just copied it and put it into, pasted it into a PDF file. So we have essentially 3 PDF files. Okay, time to build something. So I'm just copying rooting the API, OpenAI API key from an environment variable. And then I'm just taking the first resume as an example, and I'm loading it using PyPDF loader, which is from the Langchain library. And then I call load on the loader to get the data. And then we split the document, like I showed earlier, into a lot of chunks, right? So you can see we have a couple of chunks here. That's the first chunk. And then we have the second chunk there, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. So 5 chunks here, and it's just basically just splitting the document up into different pieces. So once we have this, so these are the splits, and then the idea is that we compute the embeddings of each split, and then we store it in this vector store, which is just sort of a database for embeddings. And again, we use the GPT, and this time I'm using actually, so I'm still using the GPT for all embeddings here, right? So then we have a vector store, and then we can actually start to create the GPT model with memory. The reason we're doing it with memory is because then then it remembers the previous conversation, so it's sort of nice to have that. So I'm using the GPT 3.5 turbo model, temperature set to 0, which means that it should not be that creative and should try to rely on the source data that it's given. Right. So yeah, so this is just from the Langchain documentation. So we use this retrieval chain where we just give it the vector store, the LLM, the vector store, the model to use, the vector store, as well as the memory. And this then gives us this QA chain that we can use to repeatedly ask questions from the chatbot. Now I won't be doing it in this notebook. I'll be using something called StreamLit because it has sort of nicer interface, and then we get to sort of the interesting parts. So I'm using something called StreamLit to create this nice user interface in Python. I won't be going through it in this video, but it's this nice package that allows you to basically create user interfaces for Python with very little code. So I've uploaded the 2 resumes and the job description, as well as my API key. And now I'm actually able to ask it questions about these documents. So I'm just gonna ask it, I need to make a hiring decision. Attached are 2 candidate profiles. Which candidate should I pick? Base your decision on the data provided with clear reasons. So let's see if it's actually able to make a hiring decision. And it's running. So I actually had to prompt it a couple of times in order to get a proper response. And I also had to change the prompt a bit and tell it that 2 candidate profiles and 1 job description are attached. And then I was able to get some interesting answers. So the education, so the job description mentions that either a master's or bachelor's is fine. And 1 candidate has a master's, or has a bachelor's, the factor is neutral. Yes. Required skills, candidate 1 has solid working knowledge of Postgres, including query analytics and query improvement. And so it gets a point here according to the model. Whereas candidate 2's skills are not directly mentioned in the job description, so it's unclear if they have the required skills. Yeah, so in this case, I guess it was unable maybe to sort of read the information, or somehow the information didn't go through. But in any case, the good thing is that at least it figured out that candidate 1 has experience in Postgres, and we can just quickly double check that. If I'm not mistaken, then Postgres is explicitly mentioned, so like in 3 places. And also if we just search for query, it is also mentioned in 1 place that the candidate has experience using Django to query a database. And both of these things are mentioned also explicitly in the job description, Postgres, and also query analytics and improvements. So I give it a point here. So the candidate 2 skills are mentioned here. So these, I guess, were not read by the LLM for some reason. So if we move on to nice to have skills, this is actually an area where the LLM hallucinates. So it's where it's making up information, and is actually one of the pitfalls of large language models, and which is why we should be careful about using them in this sort of situation, right? So it says here that candidate 1 has experience working with GIS and post-GIS plugin. Because that is a requirement in the job description, or at least it's in the nice to have down here. And as is very clear from this resume here, post GIS is not mentioned anywhere. So this is just something that the LLM has actually made up. And candidates 2 skills for some reason are, again, not really, it can't really figure those out. In the experience section, the job does not mention specific requirements. All right. Again, this is, I think, an area where it's hallucinating. So it's saying that candidate 1 has experience in deploying database schemas and data with continuous integration and continuous delivery. And that is actually not true. And that is actually not true because it's not mentioned anywhere. CI, CD, or any of that is not mentioned anywhere. So again, this is a case where it's hallucinating. Right. So agile, yeah, do not have the skills. This factor is neutral. So yeah, I don't know. So candidate 1 is the better choice according to the LLM. I think I will agree with it based on the 2 resumes that I gave it, because candidate 2 was actually not so focused, I would say, the resume. But again, there are some hallucinations, some missing information. So yeah, there you have it. Yeah, so I think I'll end this video on this note, and I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something from it. It's a bit longer than usual, I guess, the video, and there's a lot more you can actually do, with this, and then it's super interesting, right? So maybe I'll just give it a shot here and just say, roast the 2 resumes, please, something like that, and then it's able to, okay, it's gonna fulfill that request. All right, yeah. Maybe I can ask it, give some improvements. Give some improvements to candidate 1's resume. And let's see if it, yeah. But the point is, you can give, all sorts. You can play around with this a lot, and I will put up the code somewhere in GitHub and also link it in the project, in the YouTube video description. Yeah, so some improvements that can be made, right? Add a summary or objective statement to provide, as a summary or objective statement at the beginning of the resume, include specific examples or achievements, provide more details about the data cleaning and processing tasks, consider reorganizing the education section. Yeah, so there's a lot of ideas that it has. Right, so thank you for watching, and subscribe and like if you enjoyed.